And today we're diving into the work of French artist Jean-Baptiste Maitre, specifically his exhibition, uh, Lower Your Voice in the Room of Unlikeness, or Silence dans le Salon de la Dissemblance.
And we've got the gallery's exhibition text, the list of works, his bio, basically the official materials to work from.
Right. So our mission here is to sort of peel back the layers on this show, look at the techniques, the references he's pulling in.
And try to figure out what he's really getting at, about truth, identity, how we kind of present ourselves to the world.
That title alone, Lower Your Voice in the Room of Unlikeness, it's pretty intriguing, isn't it? Really sets a mood.
It totally does. And it places you right there, mentally at least, in the gallery Martin van Zomeren in Amsterdam.
Okay, so imagine you're walking in. What hits you first? What are we actually looking at here?
Well, you've got 14 portrait paintings, and then there's this one single, really striking panoramic photo.
14 portraits and one photo.
Yeah. And the feeling you get, or at least what the sources suggest, is like you're seeing this curated cast of characters. Maybe part of some weird social gathering or play. There's this undercurrent of feeling that Maitre is maybe poking at social decay.
And his style, the way he paints them, it's not typical portraiture, is it? The notes say he applies oil paint like makeup.
That's such a key phrase. It's deliberate.
Yeah.
It connects his actual painting method directly to the big themes, applying something, fabricating, literally making up a face, or maybe even a whole reality.
Which loops us right back to that title. Lower Your Voice in the Room of Unlikeness. What's behind that? Where's it coming from?
Okay, so there are two main things going on there, according to the text. The unlikeness part. That comes from Saint Augustine.
Saint Augustine.
Yeah, his idea of unlikeness to truth, sort of the theological concept about humanity falling away from some true, maybe divine image. And Maitre uses portraiture to explore that distance, that gap from authenticity.
Okay, so that's the unlikeness, a kind of philosophical anchor about truth in images. What about the room?
That's straight out of Luis Buñuel, his surreal 1962 film Angel Exterminador, The Exterminating Angel.
Ah, the one where the dinner guests can't leave the room.
Exactly that one. They finish dinner, they're in the living room, and suddenly, inexplicably, they just can't cross the threshold to leave. They get trapped, things get messy, very Buñuel.
Classic. And that film reference connects directly to the big photograph in the show.
It does, yeah. The photo is basically a deep dive into that specific moment of entrapment in the film. But here's the twist, and this is where it really involves you, the listener, or anyone visiting the gallery. Maitre actually says he sees the people walking into the gallery, the viewers, as figures who complete the scene. You become one of the assembly, part of that room you're looking at. You're kind of implicated.
Wow. Okay, so you're not just a passive observer looking at a scene about being trapped or whatever. You're subtly pulled into it.
Right. It really changes how you experience it.
So how does that big panoramic photograph work with all the individual painted portraits then? What's its role?
It acts like a stage setter, a unifier. By showing that specific cursed living room from Buñuel's film, it kind of pulls all those different painted characters together.
Wow.
It gives them this shared context, this atmosphere of tragedy maybe, or confinement. Like they all somehow belong in that same metaphorical space, even though they're from different times or contexts.
Got it. It provides the overarching setting. Okay, so with that frame set up by the title and the photo, let's really get into the paintings themselves. The courses break them down into 4 groups, right?
Yep, 4 main themes. Makeup, the thinkers, head in a vase, and the archetypes. Gives us a nice way to walk through his ideas.
Let's start with makeup.
Yeah.
This group apparently kicked off the whole project and links right back to that Augustine idea of unlikeness.
Exactly. This is where he really tackles that idea head on. He's looking at portraits across time, ancient Roman busts right up to contemporary figures, and he's zoning in on this like basic human thing, our need to make images, to construct how we look, to make up reality.
And the technique itself, those visible brushstrokes, borrowing from painters like Velázquez, Hals, Manet, the fast painters, that underlines the act of putting something on, doesn't it?
It really does. The paint itself becomes like the makeup, the layer being applied. And the question he seems to be asking is a big one. If we're always making ourselves up, creating these artificial images, what does that do to the idea of truth? Does it even matter anymore?
Let's look at an example. Travestissement des faits. That translates to something like distortion of the facts, but the subtitle is painting as makeup. 2 pieces here. Right cheek and left cheek.
Right. So he takes the exact same Roman bust for both, but paints them from opposite sides. And here's the clever bit. He applies the brushwork style of Delacroix to one cheek and Manet to the other.
Ah. So painting is the makeup. He's literally applying different historical styles to the same face, changing how we see it.
Precisely. It's a visual pun, but a really smart one.
And what about the one with the Japanese no mask?
Japanese no theater mask. For this one, he takes the mask and paints it using qualities you'd see in, say, Franz Hall's reverse Bronx portrait. But then he adds this really noticeable blue eyeliner.
Blue eyeliner.
Yeah. It creates this bridge, between the traditional makeup used in no theater to transform actors and the actual physical paint he's using on the canvas. Stage makeup meets the materiality of paint.
Performance meets painting. Okay. And your holoface, that sounds very sci-fi.
It is, sort of. It's based on a sculpture from the Paris Opera, an actor figure either putting on or taking off a mask. Maitre made up the word holoface himself. It's like hollow plus hologram.
Okay.
So it suggests this idea of a maybe futuristic digital face thing, like a device you'd use for virtual chats, presenting a constructed face without any of the real-world risk or vulnerability.
A digital mask for interacting safely online, maybe. Fits the fabrication theme perfectly.
Absolutely. And speaking of layering and fabrication, daughter of Rubens as Chinese oil worker. That title is doing a lot of work.
Yeah. How does he get there?
Well, it started as this study in transformation. He combined three things. Rubens' very tender portrait of his daughter, a 19th century sculpture by Carpeaux called China, and then a modern photo of an oil rig worker, face covered in oil.
That's quite a mix.
It is, but what's fascinating is how he combines them. He looks for the painterly qualities in each source. The oil stains on the worker become like paint. The softness of the skin in the Rubens, the sculpted form of the Carpeaux, he layers these qualities.
So he's finding visual connections across totally different images.
Exactly. And by layering them, he balances these contrasting ideas like innocence and industry, history and now, softness and hardness. It's about how you can layer different visual languages to show a complex reality.
That layering process is really something. Okay, let's shift to the second group, the thinkers. Portraits of Mao, Sartre, Robespierre.
Yeah, big names, figures tied to major political or philosophical ideas, and he gives them that same textured, makeup-like treatment. Here, he's exploring how we connect a person's face with their public position, their ideas, their power.
So it's about how their image functions publicly. Like Jean-Paul Sartre et la fausse moustache, Sartre with a fake mustache. What's that about?
For Maitre, according to the text, that fake mustache is kind of a symbol. It represents the artist's freedom to step in, to interpret, to add his own layer, his own makeup onto this famous historical figure. It messes with the line between the real Sartre and the artist's version.
A playful intervention. And then Mao, daily cover-up routine. The notes give some specific historical context for this one.
They do. It seems Maitre was thinking about the controversy around the Belgian writer Simon Leys back in the 70s. Leys wrote critiques of Mao's Cultural Revolution, things like Chinese shadows. And the source material points out that some French intellectuals at the time were quite critical of Leys. They saw Mao's China as this potential alternative to Western capitalism, and the source suggests they perhaps misinterpreted the reality, mistaking control for liberation. So they dismissed Leys' accounts of the repression.
And this was happening just as Andy Warhol was doing his famous Mao portraits.
Exactly. Warhol's silk screens from 72-73 turned Mao into this sort of pop icon. The source notes that this kind of glamorized image visually resonated with that idealized view some people held. So Maitre takes that Warhol aesthetic, the pop colors, repeated image.
It adds his own twist.
Right. He renders it with his characteristic brushwork, making it look deliberately like green cosmetic cover-up, the kind used to hide blemishes or redness.
So using the visual language of concealment of makeup, layered onto a pop art style, to comment on how power is presented and maybe hidden.
That seems to be the idea. It's a commentary on the construction and reception of powerful images, using that specific historical moment as a case study. It's important to stress the text suggests Maitre isn't taking a political stance on Mao himself here, but rather reflecting on how his image was constructed, perceived, and debated, and how that relates to masking reality.
Okay, focusing on the image and its interpretation.
Yeah.
Got it. What about Robespierre? Masque mortuaire du jeune Robespierre, death mask of the young Robespierre.
This one starts with something quite recent. A 2013 digital facial reconstruction. It was based on a death mask of Robespierre that Madame Tussaud actually showed way back in 1802.
A digital face from a death mask.
Yeah. And apparently that reconstruction, which showed signs of illness, caused a bit of an uproar in France. Some saw it as unflattering, maybe even ideologically motivated.
Interesting how even a historical reconstruction can get caught up in politics.
Isn't it? So, what Maitre did next was quite clever. He was in Amsterdam, visited the Pipe Museum, and found this old clay pipe shaped like a caricature head of Robespierre. Made in the Netherlands, probably mocking the French Revolution.
It's a satirical pipe head.
Exactly. And Maitre used that caricatured pipe as his model for the painting. He emphasizes the exaggerated satirical features, turning the whole thing into something that looks like a theatrical mask.
So it goes from historical figure to death mask to digital reconstruction to satirical pipe and finally to a painted theatrical mask.
Wow. It's all about the layers of representation and how meaning shifts at each step.
Okay, that's the thinkers. Now, the third group is just one painting acting as a sort of bridge, head in a vase.
La tête dans vase ou cueillir l'absence par les anges. Yeah, this one feels a bit different. It introduces a bit more maybe movement or narrative potential.
And the title is strange, right? I feel my head in a vase to grasp absence by his handles. The source says it's not a real idiom. He just made it up to sound like one.
Yeah, it has that ring to it, doesn't it? Like something you should know. He seems to be using this invented phrase to explore a feeling. Maybe the desire for anonymity, or wanting to sort of disappear into something solid but fragile like a vase.
Vanishing into something opaque. It's a curious, maybe slightly sad image. Okay, and that leads us to the final group, the archetypes. 5 paintings, figures shown more from the torso up, doing things.
Right. These carry on with the facial treatments we've seen, but now he adds costumes, objects, gestures. The figures are doing recognizable stuff. One's holding a mask, someone's presenting vases, talking on an old phone, posing maybe for social media, smoking at a bar.
They sound like snapshots of modern social roles or behaviors.
That's exactly the idea. Maitre calls them emerging archetypes. He's sketching out these kinds of roles we see around us, and every part of the painting adds to it. The brushstrokes suggest psychology, the clothes give context, the objects hint at function, the gestures imply social codes.
But the sources stress they're kept quite ambiguous, not clearly defined roles.
Very important point, yes. He doesn't spell it out. He presents these figures, often looking a bit quiet or awkward, and leaves it open. It invites you, the viewer, to read the role based on your own understanding of these visual cues.
Let's grab a couple of examples. A failure of concealment.
This one's based on a 19th century sculpture bust by Carpeaux, apparently chosen because it conveys the sense of, weary dignity. The figure holds a torn paper mask over their face, but it doesn't really hide the weariness, it almost frames it.
So the attempt to hide actually reveals.
Exactly. And Maitre deliberately leaves the skin around the mask bare so that feeling of disappointment or tiredness stays visible. The title says it all. The concealment failed.
There's a real vulnerability in that.
Okay.
What about if you know you know? That sounds like pure internet slang.
It totally is. It taps right into that online thing where meaning depends on being part of a specific group or knowing the inside joke. And the painting itself reflects that it's intentionally ambiguous.
How so?
Well, there's a visual repetition. The figure holds 2 vases, echoing the, repetition in the title. But the actual scene, what the person is doing or feeling, isn't clear at all.
So the title points to shared niche understanding, but the image itself is open.
Precisely. The source suggests this is about how we make meaning ourselves, using our own memory, our own cultural background. It frames this interpretive act as maybe one of the few freedoms we have left from just being fed prepackaged meanings all the time.
That's a really interesting take on navigating today's information overload. Okay, zero duck feedback. Sounds very online too.
Definitely. This one seems to engage directly with online performance and self-presentation. You've got a figure with a slightly puffy face, maybe a big nose, could be a mask, could be heavy makeup, maybe even bad cosmetic surgery, it's unclear. And they're doing the duck face selfie pose.
The duck face.
Yeah, and the title breaks down like a tech review. 0 could refer to the harsh wing light often used for selfies or streaming. Duck for the lips, obviously. Feedback suggests a live string context. The overall feeling is maybe frustration putting on this performance but getting nothing back. No validation from the invisible audience.
Captures that feeling of performing into the void online.
Seems like it. And then there's Freedom Fry Strategist, another title with echoes.
Yeah, Freedom Fries. Takes you back? What's the image?
It's loosely inspired by Manet's painting La Prune, and also a classical bust of Pericles, the Athenian statesman. But Maitre changes it up. The figure looks young, wearing this slightly awkward helmet. They seem idle, just sitting there reflecting. Kind of part soldier, part civilian.
Okay, a mix. What else is there?
On the table beside them, you see nitrous oxide canisters, laughing gas, often linked to teenage partying, and a bottle of liquor. And crucially, their t-shirt says, Freedom Fries.
Right, from the U.S. renaming French fries during the 2003 Iraq invasion.
Yeah. Exactly. So the sources suggest Maitre uses this mix to contrast grand, heroic imagery, like Pericles, with a kind of modern disillusionment. These big historical narratives or political gestures get absorbed and flattened into everyday things like t-shirts, slang, casual drug use.
He's showing how these potent symbols become part of the everyday texture of life, creating these complex, maybe even contradictory modern figures, not judging, just observing.
That's the feeling, yeah. Depicting the visual landscape. And the last one in this group, landline with stripes.
Okay, landline instantly feels dated. Stripes. Exaggerated makeup.
Yep. The landline signals old tech, a communication mode where visuals don't matter. But the figure has this really heavy makeup and wears a bold striped shirt, both very visual elements, focusing on surface, pattern, appearance.
So there's a disconnect.
That seems to be the point. The character is visually made up, but they're talking to someone who can't see them at all. It raises questions about painting itself, about representation, what gets shown versus what's hidden or irrelevant in communication.
Okay, that covers the 4 painting groups, each exploring identity and representation from a different angle. Let's swing back to that one big photograph we started with, cut through the living room of the exterminating angel.
Right, the panoramic one. It's a digital construction meticulously recreating a specific camera move, a long tracking shot from Buñuel's 1962 film.
And it captures that exact moment, right? When the dinner guests realize they're trapped, cursed.
Yes. Maitre was apparently obsessed with that sequence. To make this image, he literally went into the film and extracted every single frame of that camera pan. That's 24 frames for every second of the shot.
Wow. And then stitched them all together.
Into one enormous, continuous panoramic image. So you see the entire sweep of the camera's view all at once. It compresses time and space, laying out that whole cursed living room and all the trapped figures in a single frozen perspective.
That's incredible dedication. It really highlights how central that film is to his thinking here. Now, can we talk a bit more about his actual painting process? You mentioned his background is unusual.
It really is a fascinating mix, yeah. It's very hybrid. He starts traditionally painting the subject in grisaille.
Which is?
Shades of gray. It gives the painting this underlying sculptural quality, like building the form first before adding color.
Okay, like an underpainting.
Exactly. But then he brings in his other life. He worked for 2 decades as a high-end beauty retoucher.
So digital manipulation comes in.
Big time. He photographs the grisaille painting, takes it into Photoshop, and this is where he starts layering digitally, adding skin tones, adding textures.
And is this where he used bits from the old masters?
Yes, he actually samples digital textures from brushwork by painters like Velázquez, Manet, Halls, Versbronck, Sargent. He uses the digital space to play around to see how these historical textures interact with the face he started in grisaille.
So he prototypes the look digitally before committing to paint.
Kind of, yeah. It allows him to study the effect. And then he goes back to the physical canvas. He translates what he worked out digitally into actual layers of oil paint, building up that tactile surface over the gray base.
That blend of traditional grisaille, digital sampling, and layered oil paint is really unique. And there's a quote from him about it.
Yeah, he describes it really well. He says, "For each painting, I paint multiple portraits on top of one another, each covering the last. And then, face after face, I work until the figure meant to emerge becomes obvious."
Until the figure meant to emerge becomes obvious. That sounds like the process itself mirrors the themes of finding or constructing an identity through layers.
It really does feel connected, doesn't it? Like he's excavating the final image through the process of layering.
And his background makes so much sense now. Traditional painting, drawing, digital retouching, and even archaeology.
That combination is everything. The understanding of historical form from archaeology, the classical skills from painting and drawing, and the deep knowledge of image manipulation from retouching. It all feeds into this hybrid approach.
And he still works commercially as a retoucher, too.
Apparently so, alongside his fine art career. That ongoing engagement with commercial image making clearly informs his art about constructed appearances. He also has significant ties here in Amsterdam.
Right, you mentioned residencies.
Yeah, at the Jan van Eyck Academy and the Rijksacademie, which are major institutions. And his animation-shaped cinema, which sounds like it explored similar ideas of form and transformation, is actually in the collection of the Stedelijk Museum.
So he's well established and has shown internationally.
Definitely. Places like the Centre Pompidou, EYE Film Museum. And just as a little local detail, the sources mention his 2014 portrait of Donald Rumsfeld is currently on view in the collection of de Nederland Bank, the Dutch central bank, here in Amsterdam.
Rumsfeld. Okay, another layer of engagement with power and public image. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. The title's meaning, the interplay of photo and paintings, the specific themes in the groups, his unique process, his background. Let's try to synthesize. What are the main threads running through all of this?
Well, it keeps coming back to that core tension between unlikeness and truth. How real are the images we see, the faces we present? That leads right into fabrication versus reality. How much is constructed? How much is real?
And identity is huge here. How fluid it is, shifting across time periods in his references, across digital and physical spaces in his process, and across social contexts in the archetypes.
Yeah, and those archetypes themselves showing how we read social roles through visual cues, clothes, objects, gestures, even paint texture. There's often a subtle sense of disillusionment, too, particularly in the more contemporary figures.
Plus that constant play between perception and concealment.
Mm-hmm.
What do we actually see and what's being hidden, either deliberately by the subject or just by the nature of representation?
And maybe most importantly, bringing it back to the start, that idea that you, the viewer, are actively involved. You complete the scene, you bring your own interpretations, your own history to make sense of these ambiguous figures.
So thinking about all that, this idea of making up reality, constructing who we are, the masks we wear, the roles we play or see others play, how does that land with you personally? The exhibition isn't just showing pictures. It feels like it's nudging you to think about your own relationship with images, both the ones you look at and the ones you might project.
It definitely pushes you beyond just looking at portraits. It makes you question how we see, how we present, and what authenticity even means in a world saturated with images like ours.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into Jean-Baptiste Maitre's Lower Your Voice in the Room of Unlikeness. It's such a rich mix. Art history, film history, technology, and some really sharp observations about being human right now.
Yeah, it's the kind of exhibition that sticks with you. Makes you look a bit closer at faces, maybe, both online and off.
If we've piqued your interest, there's plenty more to explore based on what we discussed. You can track down Buñuel's film, Angel Exterminador. It's a classic.
Or maybe read up a little on Saint Augustine's idea of unlikeness. Or even just look again at works by those painters. Maitre samples, Velázquez, Halls, Manet, Sargent. Seeing their original brushwork might give you another perspective on what Maitre is doing with it.
Good suggestions. And maybe one last thought to chew on, circling back to Maitre's own words. He paints face after face until the figure meant to emerge becomes obvious. And he says the viewer completes the assembly.
Right.
So how did that challenge us to think about our own lives, our own process of maybe becoming obvious to ourselves or to others? And what role does the viewer, anyone we interact with, play in shaping who we appear to be or who we become?
That's a deep one to end on. The viewer completing the picture applies to more than just art galleries, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.